Hello, Miss April here at Kearney Public Library. We are going to be doing an online Watercolor Wednesday course. So I'm going to show you a brief outline of what we're doing. I'll show you our supplies, just some basic steps, and these are going to be things that you can do whether you're a novice or if you've painted for a lot of years. They're kid-friendly and adult-friendly. It's just something fun you can do from home. For Watercolor Wednesday online, we're going to be making 4-season bookmarks, and we've got some general supplies that you're going to need. With our paper, our watercolor paper, I used paper that was 140 pounds. These are cut down to about a 2x7 size. They fit the plastic sleeves that we've got so that you can keep your bookmark protected and not get your watercolor paint on your book pages. So you've got those, are pretty handy. So you need paper, we've got sleeves, we've got some ribbon to decorate, painter's tape. I've got 2 different palettes here. I've got some metallic iridescent type paints, just a regular watercolor palette. And then I also have some of my tube paints and Q-tips, paper towels, water. I've got an assortment of brushes, a Sharpie marker, and just a silver watercolor pencil. You might not need all of these supplies. Things like the watercolor pencil, you could use a regular pencil, colored pencils. So you have options for what you have at home. And with the paints, when I did the bookmark for winter, I actually used tube paint when I put it on there. If you only have the palette paint like this, you can just apply several layers. To get your supplies ready, you have some options. I actually wanted my paint to go all the way to the edge, so what I did for this one, I actually took a bigger sheet of watercolor paper and taped it down on all 4 sides. I painted the whole thing, let it dry, and then I cut down my sizes so that it would be completely blue and I wouldn't have any of those white taped edges. So you can do that if you like, or you can tape top and bottom like I've got here, or you can actually go ahead and tape all 4 sides so that you have a nice border that's white on all the edges. That way you can add your own touches at the end. You can leave it white, or you can fill it in with a Sharpie marker. You just have a lot of choices with this project, and I think it's really fun. So to get started, I'm actually going to tape this down. Where I have it all colored in, I'm just going to tape the corners so that I'm not pulling up too much of that ink. Excuse me, the paint. Basically, I just want enough so that it stays attached to my board and it's not moving around on me when I'm trying to paint those snowflakes. And then anything that you need to go back over, you can kind of just touch up with a little bit of paint, and you don't have to worry too much about warping the paper that your bookmarks are on. I am going to start with the fall bookmark, since we're still in fall, even if it feels a little bit like winter out there. And I did a candy corn bookmark. I thought it'd be fun and kind of festive for the season. I tried some other ones where I did like a corn husk and some leaves. So anything that you really like. I just thought the candy corn one looked fun. I am going to take just my silver watercolor pencil and I'm going to just draw some little triangle shapes randomly throughout my picture here. I think candy corn has kind of a curved edge, so if you want to round out those edges, you can. Stencils can be used as well if you like. You can do different sizes too if you'd like. Make them bigger or smaller. And just put a couple of lines. I know there's a lot of different colors in candy corns, but I went with that traditional yellow, orange, and white. I like using a number 8 round brush because it really comes to a point. So it's easier to paint lines, in my opinion. You can also use a shorter bristled brush like this if you feel like you have a little bit more control or it's more comfortable to hold, or even just what you have on hand. And I'm just going to go through. My brush strokes are kind of like using a pencil. And I'm not too worried about, going outside the edges or maybe a little bit over my lines, because I'm going to go over it with a Sharpie marker at the end just to give it more definition and make it stand out. If you don't want your colors running together, since they're the orange and yellow are right next to each other, I would recommend letting this dry first. Go ahead and start painting in my orange colors. And when I do this while the yellow is still wet, if I just leave a really tiny line between the two colors, then they don't bleed together. But like this one where I'm actually letting it touch, it's bleeding together a little bit, which isn't a bad thing. If you like your colors to do that, you can. And again, if you're going over it with a marker later, you'll cover up some of that anyways. I like painting with Q-tips too. So if you've got kiddos, maybe you want to do a fun fall craft, you could make these candy corns a little bit bigger and just paint them in with Q-tips. Okay, so I've got my candy corn colors in there, and I'll just leave that top section white. Set aside my brush. I'm going to get some Q-tips out. It seemed like there was too much white space in there when I was working on this, so the Q-tips making polka dots add just another element of color and breaks up all that white area. So I'm just going to do it kind of the way I would a brush, where I get the Q-tip wet and circle it in the paint. Just make little polka dots. I have a really bad habit of sticking the side of my hand into whatever I'm working on, so I'm trying to keep my hand away from the edges. Okay, so I've got my polka dots. I'm going to let this dry completely before I do anything with the Sharpie marker, just so that I'm not smearing paint and ink and making a mess of my project. So I'm going to let this dry. All right, so the final step, once this is completely dried, I'm going to use just a Sharpie marker, and I'm going to outline my candy corns. And you can decide if you want to do a thin line or a bolder line. And again, if you want it to be perfectly straight, you can use rulers or stencils. Sometimes doing it freehand and just adding that quality makes it look kind of cool on its own. So I'm just outlining the shape, and I put a few little dots kind of randomly on there. And I actually put some black polka dots too. And again, if you want to leave this white border, you can. Otherwise, you can take a ruler. I'm just going to use the line of my tape here. And I'm going to take that tape off just to show you what I'm doing here. Again, some of my paint's not completely dry, so I'm trying to be careful. But then where I've got my lines, and you can go on the other edges as well, just go ahead and color it in with your marker. And you can use colored pencils too, you know, if you want a softer image. But that just gives it kind of a cool border. And then this is what the finished product looks like. I went ahead and colored in all those edges and outlined all the candy corns and the little spots. And that's my finished bookmark. The bookmark we're going to be painting is the winter bookmark. And I wanted to do just snowflakes and then make it look kind of like a frosted window, like you're looking outdoors. And again, what I did, I painted a whole sheet of paper blue and then cut it down. I used tube paint, and I used a lot more paint than water. So you have a choice when you get your first coating on. And I am actually using metallic paint. And I chose the color that looks just like a white pearl color. And you can buy metallic colored Sharpie markers or gel pens. Sometimes if you don't feel like you have complete control with a brush, you can go ahead and use that option just so that it's easier to draw it in. But I am just going to use, it starts out as an X pattern. And then you do another X. And I'm just taking that brush and carefully making my small lines that branch out. And again, if you want to do something that's bigger, you can use Q-tips with metallic paints just the same as you would some of the others. You can vary your sizes. I think the trick with this is just not applying too much pressure with the tip of your brush. And then if you move your strokes out and kind of just lift up a little bit with the brush tip, it gives it those nice fine little tips at the end with the snowflakes. And I even just went in with my round brush and filled in some small dots. And then I also took Q-tips to get a little bit bigger spots of snow. That way you've got some flakes that look like they're close up and some that are in the distance. And then for the border, where it looks like frosted glass, you can use your Q-tip and just go along the edges. It's going to make the paint bleed a little bit. You're going to be lifting up that blue paint, so you're going to want to use multiple Q-tips or clean your brush and let each layer dry. So with the Q-tip, I can kind of just go in like that. And with my brush, it's the same idea. And you can see that when I'm putting that second coat on, it's starting to dry a little bit, and you can see a little bit more of that iridescent white. And I chose to layer my colors several times so that the edge would look bright. But you know, if you like the way that blue color comes through, you can do that as well. And then I took my short bristled flat brush, and it kind of has frayed ends anyways. So I just kind of use that to blot right around that edge where you're seeing the glass and the snowflake, just to kind of soften up that image. And that's really all there is to this one. You know, you can go as detailed or as simple as you like. If you've got kids that are working on this and maybe you just want to use the Q-tips, I think that those spots look really pretty. All right, the next one we're going to be painting is the spring one. And I just took, on this one, I used metallic paint. I used metallic pink and green, but I'm actually just going to paint with pastel colors here. And if you want to use a ruler, definitely can. I'm actually just going to use the back of one of my cut bookmarks. And I'm just going to make little stripes. Sometimes the simplest things can be a lot of fun, and you don't have to work too hard to get something that's very pretty. So I just drew some lines across my page. I'm going to try just a pale blue. And if you do tape your sides down so that you're not getting any warping with your paper and you want it to go completely to the edges, just let this dry completely and then go back in and take the tape off and put a little bit of paint on your edges. And when I'm painting lines, I'm actually flattening out the brush a little bit just so that I can really get that line clean. It does take some practice, so don't be discouraged if you don't get it right away. You can choose if you want your brush strokes to show or if you want to smooth those out by running the brush all the way across. I kind of like the way the smooth lines look on this one. And pastel colors always make me think of spring, so I thought this was kind of a fun idea. And if you like to draw, you can paint these in and then you could draw little doodles across your stripes if you want. Maybe draw some spring flowers or butterflies. I'm going to take just a lavender color for the second one. If you don't want your colors to bleed together, again, you're either going to want to leave just a tiny gap if your paint is still wet, or let this first layer dry completely and then go in with your next color. It'll save you a lot of grief if you want some clean lines to let that first layer dry. And I didn't apply a ton of water to my paint palette either. That does help, so that by the time I got done with those stripes and I start in with this one, my first one's pretty much dry. And I don't know if it's being left-handed, but I am really good about running my hands through the paint. So I'm really trying not to do that. I kind of keep my hand towards the outside off of my paper to keep myself from doing it. There's so many different ways you can do one project. You know, you can change your colors, you can change the width of the stripes. You know, you can add extra details. Really just have fun with it and do what you want. And as far as places that you can find your supplies, the metallic paints, you know, you can find at most craft stores and even some retail places, and it's not terribly expensive. Most palettes are going to be under $10. And you can see my edges aren't completely clean. There's some little spots of white and maybe some that kind of overlap with the colors. But I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to go back in with my watercolor pencil. And if you prefer, you know, if you have a set of regular colored pencils, maybe you don't have watercolor pencils at home, you know, they work about the same way. Markers, pencils, just whatever you have on hand. It doesn't have to be complicated or make you have to go out to the store if you don't have time. So what I'm going to do, you can use a ruler or anything with a straight edge. And just go ahead and fill that in. I just thought that this soft gray was a pretty color. It's not super dark. And I'm just freehanding this because sometimes that's easy enough. So basically I'm just making those lines a little bit more crisp between the colors. It distinguishes. And then if you want to, you can add some lines in opposite directions. I started adding some variation where it was a fine point and it gets wider. And you know, maybe you don't like these extra lines in here. Maybe you just want to do it where you have your pinstripes, and that's fine. And again, just make sure your layers are dry so that you don't have your colors bleeding into each other, even with adding a watercolor pencil on top. If I wanted to, I could add a layer of water on top of this, but I just liked how the lines looked. So that gives you an idea of how to do a bookmark. The last one we're doing is the summer bookmark, and I was thinking summer fruits, and watermelon was one that jumped out at me right away. I used different colors. I used a lighter green and a darker green, and then I used almost just a lighter shade of pink and maybe a little bit of a mauve color. So I'm going to start with my light green. And I just run my brush back and forth, and I kept my lines uneven just for it to give it less of a uniform look. And you can decide if you want to do more of a zigzag pattern, or maybe you just want to use one shade of green. And then I went in with a darker green too. You can let this layer dry so that you see the variation like what I have here, or if you like your colors to bleed, you can just let it go right on top of your damp paint. I just made sure that my dark green color, there's a little bit of gap between the dark green and the pale green. You can choose if you want yours to go all the way to the edge, clean it up a little bit, or if you just want to leave those brush strokes. And here you can see my colors are kind of bleeding together, and I still like the way that looks. I'm going to use the same concept on the other side. I'm going to use my brighter, lighter colored pink. Maybe it's a dark pink, but it's just really vivid. And I'm using paper towels to clean my brushes, but you can use it too if you want to blot your color, if you want areas to be lighter, or if you want to add like a textured pattern. Paper towels are kind of fun. You can see that when I blot, you can actually see those textures in it. And then you can choose if you want to leave little white areas. I chose to paint to the edge. And then I'm going to go in with that darker mauve shade. And I like blotting on this side because it just lets you blend the colors. And again, it gives it a little bit of variety if you want some areas that are darker and some that are lighter. Sometimes shading can feel like a complicated process, but it doesn't always have to be. And I want some of that darker color to show through, so I'm going to let that layer my colors over. And I'm going to let this dry. Alright, so once you've let your paint dry completely, you can either use a Sharpie marker, or if you feel like you've had enough practice with brushes that you can do it with paint, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference. And I'm just doing a raindrop shape. Kind of just putting them randomly. And just to show you how you do it with a brush as well, I wouldn't use a ton of water, just so you have a little bit more control on painting those fine lines. And I'm putting the paint at the tip of my brush. I'm not filling it through and saturating it with water, just so that it's a little bit more like a pen. And then if you feel like you don't have enough water, you can add, but less is more when you're doing detail work like this. So you can do those by hand with a paintbrush, or like I said, the Sharpie marker is just kind of a quicker option. And that is your watermelon bookmark.